You are still trying to write the question in a way they cannot escape. The message arrived at 11:40 at night, and you read it in the kitchen with the light off, and your shoulders rose before you had decided anything. Your thumb moves toward the keyboard. You write what happened, then hear how the sentence might sound to them and begin changing it before your own response has fully formed. This is the fourth version. The first named the event, the second made room for their intentions, the third apologized for bringing it up so late. Now you remove the word they might call unfair and add a beginning that proves you are not attacking them. What you actually felt is buried in the middle, wrapped in enough context to be bearable. Then you wait. You put the phone face down, pick it up again, and imagine the reply that would settle your stomach. They may answer the tone instead of the question. They may explain their pressure, their memory, or why your timing made honesty difficult. Until they answer, the evening has not finished deciding what it meant. You have been doing this for a long time, perhaps without ever naming it. Then one night, the question dies before it reaches the screen. Not because you are angry or because every doubt has disappeared. Your fingers remain above the keyboard, but the next careful sentence does not come. You notice the exhaustion of asking someone else to decide whether the experience you have been living is real enough to matter. This does not feel like triumph. It feels quiet, unfinished, and almost irresponsible. You once believed that understanding their reasons would release you from confusion. Now you sense that another explanation might return you to the same place, listening carefully while your own experience waits outside the conversation for permission to become real. The awakening begins there, not when they finally confess, apologize, or give you the missing piece, but when their clarity stops being the condition for yours. Nothing outside you has been resolved. The conflict is no longer between your interpretation and theirs. It is between what you already know and what you still hope their words might spare you from knowing. You do not delete the message. You leave it unfinished while the screen grows dark in your hand. You tell yourself that you need clarity, and part of that is true, yet beneath the question is another appeal. Please give me a reason that allows me to keep what I believed about us. If their explanation is convincing enough, perhaps the distance was not rejection. The repeated silence was not their capacity, and the pattern does not have to become a conclusion. You read the message again and notice that the original experience has nearly disappeared. There is context for their fear, reassurance about your intentions, and several ways for them to avoid feeling blamed. Your stomach drops, then your mind defends them from the reaction. Their reasons may contain truth. The trouble is that each truth has been used to make your own response less trustworthy. At first, this change feels less like freedom than failure. You may assume you are giving up too early. The mind that has spent months searching for meaning does not experience silence as wisdom. It experiences silence as an unfinished task. You feel as though there must be one more question, one better tone, or one detail they have not yet understood. That task kept the relationship psychologically open, as long as you were still asking why. The final meaning could be postponed. Their absence remained something to decode rather than something you had to include when deciding what closeness with them actually meant. The harder truth was that you were not asking only because you lacked information. You were asking because information delayed conclusion. Every unanswered question became evidence that the story was not finished. That is why even a partial answer could bring enormous relief. They admitted fear, confusion, or shame, and your jaw loosened before anything in the arrangement changed. Their vulnerability felt like movement. For a few hours, perhaps for several days, the relationship seemed newly possible because the person behind the behavior had finally become visible. Yet, visibility is not the same as capacity. Someone can understand why they withdraw and still withdraw when closeness becomes demanding. They can feel genuine remorse and remain unable to repair what remorse has revealed. An explanation can be accurate, intimate, and moving while leaving the daily structure between two people exactly as it was. You often treated the accuracy as evidence of future change. If they could name the pattern, surely they were close to leaving it. If they could tell you where it came from, perhaps they would soon stop asking you to live inside its consequences. Insight became a promise that no one had actually made. In his essay on complex theory, collected in volume 8 of his works, Jung described the complex as something like a partial personality, carrying its own mood, expectation, and reflexive purpose. When theirs is activated, they may repeat what they sincerely intended to change. When yours is activated, you may begin interpreting before you have chosen whether interpretation serves you. Two old structures can meet while both people believe they are having one present conversation. You sensed this each time a profound conversation was followed by the same familiar distance. The words had been real. The return of the pattern was also real. Instead of allowing both facts to stand, you treated the conversation as the deeper truth and the repeated behavior as a temporary failure to live up to it. You were relating to the moment in which they understood themselves, while your ordinary days were being organized by the moments in which that understanding could not remain available. The distinction becomes visible in a small scene. They cancel again with a reason you immediately recognize as plausible. Your chest tightens as you read it, but before disappointment can become a complete feeling, you begin imagining the pressure they must be under. By the time you reply, their difficulty has become the main event. You tell them it is fine, and perhaps it truly is understandable. Later, the evening feels strangely empty. The issue is not one cancelled plan. It is the sequence in which their reason receives your attention before your experience receives your own. Understanding crosses the room first. You arrive after it. If you arrive at all, the need for explanation lives inside this sequence. It teaches you to suspend your response until their motive has been considered. Fairness becomes a waiting room where your perception sits without a name, because another motive can always be imagined. The waiting can continue long after the pattern has become visible. There may have been no deliberate deception. They may have given the most honest explanation available to them. They may care for you within limits they did not choose consciously. None of this has to be denied. The awakening is not a verdict about their character. It is a change in what their reasons are permitted to erase. Their history can explain why closeness frightens them without making distance mutual. Their shame can explain why repair is difficult without making your request unreasonable. Their exhaustion can explain an absence without deciding how many absences the relationship can hold. Context becomes part of reality rather than the instrument used to replace it. This is a harder use of empathy because it asks you to hold two complete realities at once. Their reason may deserve compassion, your response may deserve authority. The mind accustomed to preserving connection will try to make one cancel the other. But neither truth becomes more humane through disappearance. The answer can matter without becoming permission, and the effect can matter without becoming a final judgment of the person. This change threatens more than the bond. It threatens the identity that knew how to preserve bonds through understanding. You have often been the person who could see beneath anger, silence, and contradiction. Others may have trusted you because you gave their inner complexity more room than most people could. That capacity is genuine, yet it may have become compulsory. You no longer simply understood when understanding was useful. You understood before allowing yourself to know whether something was acceptable. The gift acquired a hidden rule. What you perceived about them had to arrive before what you perceived about yourself. The rule appears when you imagine not asking again. Guilt arrives before any decision. What if they finally would have told you the truth? What if one more conversation was the conversation that changed everything? The unanswered possibility becomes an accusation, and you feel responsible for a future that has never existed outside your hope. This is why the question can return after clarity. The need for explanation does not disappear because you intellectually recognize the pattern. It returns through longing, tenderness, and the fear of being unfair. You may still draft the message tomorrow. The difference is that another awareness now watches what the question is being asked to do. It asks for information, but it also asks to preserve the relationship from meaning. It asks them to speak, but it also asks them to prevent you from choosing. It asks for truth, while quietly hoping that truth will protect attachment from what repeated experience has already begun to reveal. The need belongs to something deeper than curiosity. It is a structure that linked understanding with belonging and made another person's explanation the final authority over your own lived experience. That structure was not created in one dramatic moment. It formed through repetition. Each time, connection became easier after you accepted another person's reasons before consulting your own response. You learned that relationships could continue through difficulty if you were willing to do the interpretive work that difficulty left unfinished. At first, the role may have felt like emotional maturity. You could recognize that people often speak from shame, withdraw from fear, and become defensive when their identity feels threatened, while others reacted to the surface. You stayed long enough to understand what lived beneath it. People could bring you contradictions because you knew how to make contradictions bearable. They could disappear and return with a reason, and you would help the reason reconnect the two versions of them before asking what the disappearance had done to you. You became the person who understood. The phrase sounds like praise because it often was. Others admired your patience. Family members relied on your calm. Partners told you that no one had ever seen them so deeply. The role provided closeness, value, and a recognizable place inside relationships that might otherwise have felt unstable. Being misunderstood yourself seemed like a reasonable price for remaining indispensable to the people you did not want to lose. The deeper truth was that understanding had become more than compassion. It was the entrance fee for belonging. You remained welcome when your perception produced tolerance, the moment perception threatened to produce a limit. You feared that the quality people valued most in you had somehow failed. The fear appears in conversation before you can name it. Someone becomes defensive and your spine stiffens. You know that the relationship is about to depend on whether you can hold their discomfort without increasing it. Your attention leaves the original issue and begins monitoring the temperature of the room. You hear your voice soften. You add context they did not request. You reassure them that you know they meant well, even when intention was never the question. By the time the conversation ends, they feel understood, and you feel strangely absent. The arrangement paid you immediately. Their face relaxed. Warmth came back. The threat of rupture receded. Your own experience could be examined later, when no one else had to witness it, because the social reward arrived before the private cost. Understanding felt like the action that had saved the relationship. No one had to name the fact that the relationship had been saved by removing you from the center of your own concern. In Volume 7 of his collected works, Jung described the persona as a compromise between the individual and the social world, a form that makes belonging and function possible. The persona is not a lie. Your patience, perception, and generosity were real. The problem began when the role of understanding became the only version of you the relationship knew how to welcome. The rest of you did not disappear. It learned to arrive privately. Anger came after the call ended. Disappointment appeared while washing a cup or lying awake beside a quiet phone. Preference became visible only when no one was present to be affected by it. The social self preserved connection, while the unrepresented self carried its cost. At work, the role may look like competence. A task lands on your desk after someone else failed to complete it. You understand the deadline, the pressure, and the supervisor who frightened them into silence. Your shoulders lift as you calculate how late you will stay. Their reason becomes operational, and your limit becomes theoretical. People praise your reliability, and the praise makes refusal feel increasingly unnatural. Being able to understand why something happened becomes a reason to absorb what happened. In friendship, the role may appear as endless context. A friend calls only when life collapses, then disappears when stability returns. You know they struggle with closeness when they are not in crisis. You understand why receiving attention is easier for them than offering it. The explanation becomes so psychologically rich that the simple imbalance feels almost unsophisticated to mention. At a family table, someone repeats an old excuse before you have finished describing the effect. Another person adds history, reminding you what they endured and how difficult emotion has always been for them. Your breath becomes shallow as the room fills with reasons. Everyone seems to know why they are limited. No one asks what those limits have required from you. The family may not intend to erase your experience. They may be using the only language of peace they know. History becomes a way to reduce blame, and reduced blame allows contact to continue. Yet when context is offered only to the person who caused the rupture, peace is purchased by making the impact socially inconvenient. You learn to provide that context before anyone asked. The skill gave you control over the moment when belonging felt uncertain. If you could name the fear beneath their defensiveness, you could predict what would restore warmth. Interpretation turned relational helplessness into a task, and tasks were easier to carry than unanswered dependence. You were not controlling the person, you were controlling how much of their response could surprise you. You softened the question before they answered. You offered reassurance before they faced consequence. You translated their silence before silence could reveal its meaning. Then you remained uncertain whether the unedited version of you could be held, because you had rarely allowed that version to arrive alone. Unconscious repetition often works through strengths rather than obvious weaknesses. Your empathy found people whose inner complexity could occupy it. Your patience found situations where patience was endlessly required. Your ability to perceive hidden fear became attached to relationships in which hidden fear repeatedly mattered more than visible participation. Nothing mystical arranged this. Familiar roles feel convincing because you know how to be valuable inside them. A relationship that requires interpretation gives you immediate purpose. A relationship that offers consistency may leave you with a more exposing question. Who are you when no one needs to be understood into treating you with care? This does not mean the closeness was imaginary. You may have shared real tenderness, and more, history, and recognition. The complication is that genuine connection became intertwined with a function. They knew the person who could understand them under pressure. You were less certain whether they knew the person who did not want pressure to be the price of intimacy. The function was reinforced each time. Vulnerability replaced repair. You named an injury. They revealed the fear behind what they had done. The disclosure moved you because it was sincere, and because openness was what you had wanted. Soon you were caring for the part of them that caused the distance, while the distance itself remained unchanged. Disclosure can feel like reciprocity, because both people are speaking from exposed places. Yet exposure is not automatically mutual. Their vulnerability may occupy the conversation, while yours becomes the doorway through which their deeper story enters. You leave knowing more about them, and still feeling that your original experience was never fully met. The body often records this difference. During the conversation, relief warms your chest because closeness has returned. Later, heaviness settles behind the ribs. You have received intimacy without repair, and the two responses coexist. The mind chooses the relief as evidence that the conversation worked. The heaviness waits without an explanation anyone wants to hear. Over time, you may become devoted to potential. You see the reflective person who appears during rare, honest moments and treat that person as the deepest truth. From a depth psychology perspective, this can involve projection. You may perceive a genuine possibility in them, then add from your own inner life the courage, steadiness, and devotion required to make that possibility continuous. The image is not invented, but it is completed with qualities the relationship has not consistently received from them. The more of yourself you place into that image, the harder it becomes to release. Letting go of the explanation would not only change your understanding of them, it would confront you with how much of the person you waited for was being sustained by your own capacity to imagine, interpret, and remain loyal to fragments. This is why another answer always seems valuable. A new piece of their history may restore the image, A newly named fear may explain the latest contradiction. The search keeps discovering real material, but each discovery performs the same function. It postpones the question of whether the person before you can inhabit the relationship their potential keeps promising. The role begins failing when its rewards no longer cover its cost. Being the one who understands still preserves contact, but you feel how absent you are from the contact it preserves. Now a space appears between explanation and renewed access. You can hear why they acted as they did without automatically resuming the former arrangement. That space feels empty because the role once filled it immediately. It also contains the decision that interpretation had protected you from making. The unanswered question has changed. It is no longer what hidden reason will finally make them available. It is what remains of the relationship when being the one who understands is no longer the entrance fee you are willing to pay. The role can no longer guarantee belonging, and you do not yet know what part of the bond can stand without it. The uncertainty inside that question is what makes separation difficult. It would be easier if their explanation were obviously false or if affection had disappeared. Instead, their reasons may be sincere, their pain may be real, and the old bond may still carry tenderness. You are not separating truth from falsehood. You are separating understanding from automatic consent. Near midnight, a message arrives with the openness you once wanted. They name the fear beneath their distance and admit that they did not know how to remain present. Your skin warms as you read. The old future returns for a moment, complete with the belief that this honesty must mean the relationship is about to become different. Then your chest becomes still. The explanation answers why they withdrew, but not what will happen when closeness frightens them again. You notice the question without rushing to send it. Their insight may be genuine. Your hesitation may also be genuine. Guilt enters immediately. You ask for honesty, and now honesty has arrived. How can you remain uncertain after they have given you what you said you needed? The mind accuses you of moving the standard, as though the purpose of an explanation were to require forgiveness on the same terms as before. But you were not truly asking for words alone. You were asking whether shared awareness could become shared responsibility. That gap carries anger. Their language may be beautiful, precise, and painfully late. You remember how often you struggled to describe what they can now explain with ease. The jaw tightens because the words are true enough to move you and insufficient enough to change the history that made them necessary. This anger is not ingratitude for their honesty. It is grief discovering that the answer you awaited cannot travel backward and stand beside you when you needed it. You may resent them for arriving after your hope has become tired. You may resent yourself for having accepted earlier fragments as proof that more was coming. The second resentment can become self-punishment, turning awakening into a trial of your intelligence. It forgets that partial truth was powerful precisely because it was not a simple lie. Each explanation contained enough reality to keep possibility morally defensible. You were not waiting for an invented person. You were waiting for moments of genuine sensitivity to become a stable way of relating. The hope remained because something real kept appearing, but never with enough continuity to settle the life around it. From a Jungian perspective, the shadow often enters through the virtue with which consciousness is most identified. The person who must always be understanding may exile judgment, refusal, anger, and the wish to stop caring about another person's reasons. These reactions do not vanish. They return through fatigue, numbness, or a sudden inability to keep explaining. Your compassion gave you a morally beautiful reason not to choose. As long as you were waiting for their explanation, they remained responsible for the next movement. They had to become clearer, more honest, or more aware. Your life could stay suspended while the missing answer belonged to them. The uncertainty was painful, but it protected you from becoming the person whose own conclusion changed the relationship. There was innocence in that suspension. If they never answered, the unfinished state belonged to their silence. If they answered poorly, the search could continue. If they answered well, hope could begin again. Every possibility returned agency to them, while your role remained to listen, interpret, and wait for the evidence that would authorize a decision. The need for explanation therefore protected more than attachment. It protected you from regret. Choosing without complete certainty meant accepting that another conversation might have changed something. Waiting allowed you to suffer without having to own the frightening finality of your own participation. There was control inside understanding as well. If you could map their fear, you could predict the next withdrawal. If you could anticipate their defense, you could reduce the shock of disappointment. Explanation did not give you power over them, but it gave helplessness a structure and kept dependence from feeling entirely unprotected. To stop seeking the answer is to surrender that structure. Their next action belongs to them without your interpretation improving it in advance. They may change, they may repeat themselves, they may never become fully conscious of what they ask others to carry. You can no longer use insight to guarantee which person will appear. The recognition is uncomfortable because it removes the innocence from waiting. Your endless understanding was not only something others benefited from, it was also the position from which you avoided the exposure of choosing. You remained morally generous and psychologically occupied, while the unanswered question kept your own preference from having to become visible. The role allowed you to call the suspension patience, even when patience had become the method through which your life waited for another person to authorize its movement. Only after this recognition has been allowed to stand can tenderness return. The role did not persist because you wanted power or confusion. It persisted because it protected bonds you were not ready to lose. It preserved love, memory, and the belief that human limitation could be met without becoming hardened by it. The tragedy was not your compassion, it was the condition that compassion had to cancel your perception in order to remain connected. The role also protected the part of you that feared causing pain. A limit would disappoint someone already carrying shame. A refusal might confirm their belief that closeness ends when they are imperfect. You could see these possibilities so vividly that their future hurt began governing your present choices before you had made them. This is why guilt can feel like moral evidence. When they are disappointed, your stomach drops and the old conclusion arrives. You must have become unfair. Yet guilt may be nothing more than the sensation of an established role being interrupted. It tells you that someone expected the former response, not whether that response was still honest. One afternoon, you sit in a parked car after a conversation that ended too quickly. Your hands remain on the steering wheel, although the engine is silent. You replay their explanation and feel the familiar urge to call back, not because the answer changed the pattern, but because their disappointment has become unbearable inside your body. The windshield reflects a face still preparing to repair a connection that the other person has already left you to carry alone. You know exactly what the call would do. Your voice would soften. You would clarify that you understood. Their tension would ease, and your chest would receive the brief relief of restored contact. You may make the call. Awakening does not transform every impulse into a clean act. Sometimes the old bargain is restored before you can bear the silence it leaves behind. The difference is that relief no longer arrives alone. Beside it is the knowledge of what had to disappear for warmth to return. That knowledge changes the next encounter. You hear yourself offering context and notice the moment your experience begins shrinking. You may not stop immediately, but the sequence is no longer unconscious. What once felt like your personality now feels like a movement, and a movement can be observed before it becomes destiny. Anger may grow as observation improves. You see how much labor was hidden beneath your kindness. Part of you wants the other person to feel every uncertainty you carried. You may imagine becoming silent until they finally understand. The wish is not always to leave. Sometimes it is to make recognition arrive through their discomfort. This wish belongs to the shadow too. If silence is used only to produce their awakening, their response still governs you. The need for explanation has changed form, becoming a need for them to recognize the explanation of your absence. Your distance becomes another message waiting for the correct interpretation. Real separation is less dramatic. It does not require them to suffer, confess, or learn the lesson your pain prepared. It allows your limit to remain valid even if they misunderstand it. This is difficult because being misread by someone you love can feel like losing both the relationship and the story that made your actions morally bearable. You may still explain yourself, but the purpose begins changing. You speak to represent your experience, not to control whether they approve of it. You tell the truth once more because you want to be known, not because their agreement is required before your own knowledge can shape a choice. Their response may reopen doubt, a soft tone, a new admission, or one tender memory can make the entire structure feel too severe. The old reflex returns most powerfully through warmth, not conflict. You are vulnerable when they briefly become the person you always believed was hidden beneath the inconsistency. The moment can be completely real. The difficulty lies in asking one moment to disprove a pattern. You no longer need to distrust tenderness. You let it belong to the present without making it responsible for predicting the future. This restraint feels like mourning. While the person is still near, you are losing the imagined continuity that made each good moment larger than itself. The relationship becomes more honest and less enchanted. What is offered can be loved for what it is, but it can no longer be joined automatically to everything you hoped would eventually be offered. You have not become free of the question. You have become unable to ask it innocently. Guilt can sit beside clarity. Love can sit beside refusal. Each return now reveals the hidden hope beneath the search, and the choice that hope was helping you postpone. The mind can still wonder what they meant, but wonder no longer conceals the fact that no answer can make the decision entirely theirs again. Once that authority changes, Other people begin to feel the difference. The shift may be almost invisible. You still listen. You still recognize fear beneath defensiveness and shame beneath distance. What no longer happens automatically is the final movement in which understanding becomes reassurance. Reassurance becomes access. And access restores the old arrangement without requiring anything else. They may notice a pause where your comfort used to arrive. Their explanation ends. And you do not immediately say that everything is fine. Your face remains gentle, but your throat does not prepare the sentence that would remove the consequence. The conversation has reached the place your interpretive labor once prevented it from reaching. To them, this may feel like a withdrawal of love. They were accustomed to your understanding arriving with restoration. If you saw their fear, you softened the limit. If you knew their history, you made room for another chance. When comprehension remains, but automatic restoration does not. They may believe that your compassion has disappeared. One of them may say it directly, "You used to understand me." The room remains ordinary. A light hums above you. Their hand moves toward a cup while your ribs pull tight, and the old sentence builds itself at once. You could acknowledge their difficulty, explain that you are not angry, and place your own hurt in a smaller clause near the end where it cannot threaten the bond. You know how to build that sentence because you have built it many times. It would make you recognizable to them again. Their face might soften. The distance might close. Your body remembers the relief before you decide whether relief would require returning to the role that made your experience disappear. For several seconds, you do not answer. The silence feels larger than it is. They are looking for the version of the conversation in which your pain arrives, already translated into something they can hold without changing. You are discovering whether another kind of conversation exists between you. The pause does not prove that it does, but it stops your labor from answering the question before they have had the chance. Their statement may contain grief as well as pressure. They may genuinely miss your unusual patience and the safety of being understood without immediate judgment. They may also miss the access that understanding once guaranteed. Both kinds of missing can live inside the same sentence without making them calculating or making your limit unkind. This is where guilt becomes social. It arrives through disappointed faces, family concern, or the suggestion that you are overthinking. People who organize their expectations around your flexibility may experience consistency as coldness. Their confusion may be sincere because you protected them from seeing the cost. You completed difficult conversations privately, carried their reasons away, and returned with warmth restored. They experience continuity without witnessing the self-doubt required to produce it. When the labor stops, the new distance seems to have appeared from nowhere. Some will respond with greater explanation. They offer more history, more vulnerability, and a finer account of why the pattern exists. Once, each detail would have reopened hope. Now you listen for a different movement. Does the truth they discovered create room for your experience? Or is your experience still being used as the doorway into their story? Not every explanation is avoidance. Some people begin with defense and return after they have had time to think. They ask what the event was like for you without using intention as the answer. Their discomfort remains in the room. but it no longer requires your disappearance. Change becomes visible through participation rather than through the beauty of self-knowledge. Other relationships reveal a narrower capacity. The person repeats the same reason, becomes exhausted by your continued uncertainty, or waits for your empathy to restore familiar terms. You may still feel their sincerity. You may also see that sincerity has reached the limit of what it can organize between you. Their feeling is not dismissed. It is simply no longer asked to perform the work that only changed participation could perform. At work, the change appears when another urgent task arrives with a persuasive history. You understand the pressure behind it and feel your shoulders preparing to accept. This time, capacity does not volunteer before choice. The explanation remains relevant, but it no longer decides that your evening belongs to the problem. A friend cancels again and sends a long account of everything that went wrong. You believe them. You do not write the message that excuses the entire pattern before they have acknowledged it. The plan remains cancelled, and the disappointment is allowed to belong to the friendship rather than becoming a private flaw in your generosity. At the same family table, someone offers an inventory of everything the person has endured. You no longer need to deny their suffering. You only notice that history is being presented to close the conversation. The jaw tightens, but you do not convert the pattern into innocence simply because everyone prefers an explanation to an unresolved limit. These moments do not announce a new identity. Sometimes you still take the task, reassure the friend, or soften the family tension. The difference is that the reflex no longer feels indistinguishable from goodness. You can notice when understanding is being offered freely and when it is being used as the fee for remaining acceptable. Some relationships reorganize around this awareness. A person may discover that being understood no longer releases them from responding. They become more capable of hearing effect beside intention. Repair remains imperfect, but the burden of making reality bearable begins to move between two people instead of settling automatically inside one. Other bonds become smaller, affection continues, but expectation changes. You stop bringing your most exposed questions to someone whose answers repeatedly become reasons you should need less. The narrower connection is not necessarily punishment. It may be the honest size of a relationship no longer enlarged by your interpretation. Some connections fade because the role was carrying more of them than either person recognized. When you stop filling every silence, silence remains. When you stop converting intermittent closeness into future promise, distance becomes visible. What ends may not be love itself, but the invisible work that kept love from revealing what it could not sustain. What is ending is not only them, it is the version of you who believed that one more explanation, offered carefully enough, could finally reach them. That version lived through every careful question. It believed that enough patience could find the unafraid person beneath withdrawal, the accountable person beneath shame, or the available person beneath confusion. Each explanation became another step toward someone you occasionally glimpsed and hoped would one day remain. You were not only waiting for them to change, you were waiting for your understanding to prove its power. If they finally became able to meet you, the years of interpretation would become devotion rather than postponement. Your sensitivity would be vindicated. The relationship would confirm that seeing potential had been a form of knowledge rather than a refuge from grief. Losing that imagined future can hurt more than losing the daily arrangement. The daily arrangement was often exhausting. The future gave the exhaustion meaning. This is why their final explanation may no longer bring relief. It can tell you exactly why they could not become the person you reached for, but it cannot return the self who organized hope around reaching them. The answer arrives after the question has changed. You no longer need to know only who they were. You are grieving who you kept becoming in response. That grief deserves room without turning the relationship into a mistake. The tenderness was real. The moments of recognition were real. Your hope carried intelligence as well as longing because it responded to qualities that genuinely appeared. What becomes visible is not that you imagined everything, but that fragments were asked to support a continuity they never acquired. From a Jungian perspective, individuation does not mean becoming invulnerable to projection or need. It means becoming less divided by an unconscious role. The interpreter remains part of you. What changes is its authority. Understanding becomes a capacity you can offer, not the identity through which every relationship must be saved. Their history can illuminate their behavior without defining your obligation. Their apology can be received without being converted into immediate trust. Your body learns this slowly. A familiar message can still shorten the breath. Their disappointment can still make your stomach fall. Yet a pause now exists between reaction and repair. Inside it, guilt, love, memory, and preference can be felt without being forced into the one response that once guaranteed belonging. Ordinary life begins carrying the change. You leave a question unanswered for the evening because urgency no longer proves devotion. You end a conversation when both realities cannot remain present. You accept that someone may misunderstand you without writing another argument designed to make their interpretation emotionally safe for you. Being misunderstood still hurts. The awakening is not indifference. It is the ability to let another person hold an incomplete story about you without abandoning your own experience to correct it. You can grieve the distance between two realities without making self-erasure the bridge that joins them. With time, explanation returns to its proper size. It can reveal intention, deepen compassion, and create an opening for repair. It cannot replace continuity. It cannot determine what an experience cost you. It cannot make a relationship mutual without participation from the person whose reasons you have learned to understand. Words recover their value when they no longer have to carry the entire relationship. You may never receive the answer that settles every question. You may continue loving them, speaking to them, or wondering what might have happened under different conditions. The shift is quieter than certainty. Their inner world no longer possesses the missing document that must be signed before your own life is allowed to respond. Their explanation remained, but it no longer decided your reality.
Hello, and welcome to the Psychoanalysis. My name is John, and I created this channel to explore the unconscious patterns that shape our emotions, relationships, and identity. Our videos are original, modern interpretations inspired by the psychological ideas of Carl Jung. They are not authentic recordings, direct quotation, or exact representations of Jung's words. artificial intelligence may assist with script development, narration, visuals, subtitles, and editing. However, every video is reviewed, refined, and creatively directed before publication. This channel is created for education, reflection, and storytelling, not therapy, diagnosis, or medical advice. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the psychoanalysis, where the unconscious becomes visible.